So Oscar asks us today, is it okay to have coffee every day? Um, and I mean, as with all answers, it depends on if you tolerate the coffee well. But if you are tolerating coffee well and you have enough energy on board, I don't really see an issue with drinking coffee every day. And even in some studies, having multiple cups a day was shown protective against neurologic diseases and against multiple types of cancers, and has also been shown to be extremely protective against liver cancer. And again, you want to have a good quality coffee, and you want to make sure that you're tolerating it well and you have energy on board. So you have it with either some cream and some sugar if you tolerate those, or you have fruit juice with it if you're taking shots of espresso or whatnot. So the other benefits of coffee besides being protective of the liver and cancer and neurological diseases, caffeine has some beneficial effects in and of itself. Once your body gets tolerance to caffeine, it doesn't necessarily jack up the adrenal glands like a lot of people think. That effect starts to calm down, but I think it has some aromatase inhibiting effects. Um, I'm pretty sure that it has some of those effects. Then the other thing is some other compounds in the coffee have some anti-opiate effects, so they block the effect of opiates within the digestive tract. And then there's different antioxidant compounds within coffee, or plant compounds that have a protective effect against endotoxin. Um, so there's a whole host of benefits of coffee and of caffeine, especially if you're tolerating the coffee and the caffeine well, and you're taking it with enough nutrients and whatnot. And I think there's some studies talking about the major source of antioxidant plant compounds, and many Westerners' diet is actually coffee.
Yeah.
Um, so it has a lot of benefits. There are some negatives to it, and that's based around if you can't tolerate the increase in metabolism that the coffee brings. But there is a ton of benefits from it. I mean, there's a ton of research showing benefits from coffee. That I haven't really seen so much negative research from coffee, and most of that negative research has shown when people first start taking it, when it increases metabolism, it can cause a release of catecholamines like adrenaline and norepinephrine or noradrenaline, and over time you basically develop a tolerance to that, especially if you have enough resources on board. So and I but there's a ton of benefits shown to be present with coffee, especially for the liver and especially against different cancers.
Yeah. And just to back up a little bit, as far like coffee as a whole includes various nutrients that are actually within the coffee. You get some magnesium and some B vitamins and things. You have various polyphenols, which you mentioned, coffee being the largest or most concentrated source or main source of antioxidants and polyphenols and bioflavonoids in the average Western diet, which I've seen that as well. And then also, of course, there's caffeine in there. And so that's really one of the biggest factors that people are considering. And so between the caffeine and then a couple other components of the coffee, it has a metabolically stimulating effect, meaning that it's kind of like pressing down on the gas pedal a little bit, similar to thyroid hormone would. And because of that, it can have like juxtaposing effects depending on how like somebody's you mentioned like energetic state, but depending on where someone's metabolic health is, where for one, if they don't have enough fuel to support that increased demand essentially, and if they don't have or if they're having trouble converting that fuel to energy, which we talk all the time about so many different things that cause problems there, then they're not going to respond well to coffee. They'll get really jittery. So the effects here that in the mainstream a lot of people consider to be beneficial, or like why they use coffee is for this big energy boost, and they get kind of jittery and a little hyperactive, and that's generally a sign of an increase in stress hormones, meaning that either someone's not eating enough fat, carbs, calories as a whole, or they're not able to effectively convert the food that they're eating into energy. And because of that, when you're kind of stepping on the gas pedal with the caffeine and the coffee as a whole, you're causing a stressful effect, which is, again, this is not beneficial, or I would say that that's harmful. And the fact that we see benefits with coffee despite that in the average person probably means that there are a lot of other benefits there that outweigh it. But what we're not looking for, like that's not what we're looking for when somebody's using coffee. That would be a sign that, as you mentioned, somebody's not really tolerating it. But you can improve your tolerance to coffee by fixing the things that support energy production, or fixing the factors that are involved in energy production. and also by making sure you're getting enough food and fuel. And that can mean getting enough food throughout the day or week, but also within the meal that you're having that coffee with, or what exactly you're having that coffee with. So if you're starting your day off with just coffee, then that's generally a very good way to increase your stress hormones right when you wake up. Which what we really want to do when we wake up is bring those stress hormones down, since that's normally when they peak. So if you are not responding well to coffee, I would make sure that you're having it with enough carbohydrates, especially, and ideally with a meal as well, so that it digests a little slower, and maybe try having a smaller amount and things like that, so that you're not having that jittery effect or that hyperactive effect. And instead, what you should notice is maybe more energy, but more of a relaxed energy that, people talk about when they have very good caffeine tolerance, to even be able to have coffee before like bedtime, before going to sleep, and it'll actually help them relax. And which, I mean, I've experienced that, and helps somebody fall asleep. And so that would be, and that it wouldn't have the same effect during the day. It's not necessarily going to make you fall asleep in the morning, but it shouldn't have that kind of hyperactivity, jittery effect. If it does, that's a sign of it increasing stress hormones. Yep. So those and are all things.
It also takes time to develop tolerance to caffeine and to coffee in general.
It can, yeah. I mean, it can, but not much.
For example, for you tolerate coffee pretty well, but for me, no matter how much, for me, it takes time for me to develop tolerance, and it does make me jittery in general. And I think that is just related to individuality with exposure to coffee. But for some people, my dad drinks coffee every single day, and he won't go without it because, it helps him function well. He feels great when he's on it. He's not jittery. He's not sweaty. He's been drinking it for 40 years.
Right.
So I think there is some individuality with it, but where my mom won't touch it at all.
Right. Yeah. There's definitely individuality as far as caffeine clearance and tolerance. And I know that there are some potential genetic factors there that are talked about when they do some of those, like the 23andMe genetic testing that has to do with caffeine clearance. So I think that could be involved. Yeah. Definitely as far as, another factor as far as caffeine clearance that would be separate can also be liver function, where regardless of if you're eating enough, if your liver is not functioning well, then you might not be able to process that caffeine well. It might be sticking around for a long time. And it would, in the long term, probably still have a beneficial effect on your liver function, and you might actually be able to have improved tolerance over time due to that. But in the short term, you might be getting some stress effects. So ideally, I would try to do it in a way that doesn't lead to those stress effects in the short term. But yeah, so as you mentioned as well, as far as tolerance goes to caffeine, I think it doesn't take long. Where
I think it's 2 weeks. I think if
I've seen a few days. I thought I'm going to pull it up right now.
Well, while you pull it up, the other thing that coffee is also helpful for that a lot of people don't realize is it tends to help with digestion. Mm-hmm. So it can stimulate. I think it stimulates gallbladder contraction. It stimulates stomach acid production. And then it also can stimulate, for a lot of people, bowel movement. So it can help with increasing bowel regularity. And specifically in some certain doctors' points, like in some like Max Gerson talks about, or even Dr. Pete talks about the importance of bowel regularity. And then when we think about it in general, talking about bowel regularity and whatnot, it's exposure to endotoxin. And coffee also has some protective effects against endotoxin directly, and that's not only through the plant compounds, but through caffeine and other compounds within the coffee itself. So there's a lot of benefits to coffee. I know the mainstream media likes to belabor the negative effects of it, but there is a lot of benefits with coffee, especially with tolerance. And I haven't really seen many negative studies with coffee, just besides the increase in catecholamines in people who are coffee naive.
Mm-hmm. Right. Just basically before they've adjusted, or also probably before they're not eating enough with it and having some metabolic issues. But yeah, it definitely does have some noteworthy effects on gut health. It's been shown to improve symptoms in people with IBD and colitis, and lower serotonin production in the gut, protect against various forms of damage gut-wise, and then also, as you said, protect against endotoxin, especially in the brain. And yeah, also stimulate stomach acid production. So it's definitely really helpful as far as the gut goes. And as far as the brain goes, it's generally very protective, reduces inflammation, and improves the integrity of the blood-brain barrier. It's all around. I think
Yeah.
Ray Peat has called it an adaptogen, or I think he actually refers to it as a nutrient, as if like any other vitamin or mineral. Which, I mean, according to like his criteria for it, or the criteria for those things, that may as well fit that definition. And I did just find that study. It was showing that there's the adaptation to caffeine and the tolerance took only about 4 days. But of course, a lot of that, as you mentioned, is going to be individual.
Yeah. So, and the other thing I want to point out for some people is some people mention that they tolerate actually pure caffeine better than they tolerate coffee. And so while coffee has caffeine in it, it also has, like I mentioned previously, a compound that inhibits or has like an anti-opiate effect. So if you have a decent amount of opiogenic foods in your diet, like wheat or dairy or soy, and then you start using coffee, it can block the inhibitory effects or the opiate effects of those foods on top of having caffeine. So it could be like a double, like a I guess a double whammy, like an increased effect just from that on top of what it's stimulating the adrenergic hormones. So it can have a bunch of effects simultaneously, and it can be pretty potent for some people. So, and then it does have a pretty potent effect on stimulating liver enzymes, not your ALT and AST in terms of like liver damage, but actually like some of the detoxification pathways within the liver. And it's also partly why it's protective of the liver.
Yeah. And it's like very, very protective against, it's been shown to be protective against alcoholic liver injury and support liver health. And yeah, I mean, and we talk about all these things as an intricate system. Right now, we're kind of just listing some of the details, but it's not independent. Its ability to improve insulin sensitivity and stimulate our metabolism and its anti-cancer effects are not separate. And those things are not separate from the effects on liver health or on all-cause mortality or anything else like that. So.
Yeah.